Hey guys, I'm Mac with CNBC. I've got a stacked lineup, and I'm going to get right into it. So, you guys were in Mar-a-Lago. Well, Fred, you sent somebody from your team talking to President Trump, and I've been in Nashville since Tuesday, and everybody is talking about the speech tomorrow, but they're also talking about the Republican presidential nominee being very pro-Bitcoin, and this is an about-face for him. But I want you, and this was, for the record, you guys, this was a closed-door meeting that was off the record. But we've got people that were inside the room. Jason, you already talked to me on the record about this. Take us inside. What was it like in that meeting?
It was, I think, groundbreaking. Like I've been in Bitcoin since 2013. Okay, not as long as most, but a pretty long time. And I could never fathom 10 years ago, almost 11 years ago, that there would be a former president, leading presidential candidate, talking about Bitcoin. That's how far this industry has come. The fact is, there are about 52 million Americans who own or have owned Bitcoin. That's a significant voting bloc, and this is one of the easiest issues to be behind, to be supportive. Who is voting for the politician that's against Bitcoin? That voting bloc does not exist out there. Those politicians that have taken a stance against Bitcoin have made a grave miscalculation. I think President Trump and the Republican Party see the value of this industry and understand the value of being supportive of it. And in that meeting, that was cemented for me, and that made me incredibly bullish on Bitcoin and this space.
And Zach, you were also in the room. And one of my questions, because I was talking to a lot of people who were there, I got the sense that it seemed as though he was very well versed, asking very smart questions about the industry, very engaged in the dialogue. Tell me more about what you took away from what he came into the room already knowing and what he left with.
Yeah, he didn't need to be educated on the benefits that Bitcoin could really bring. But something that was really powerful is he came in with a base understanding, but then he listened. And for me, that was the impressive part about the meeting. You know, all of our aunts, uncles, grandparents, they all have these preconceived notions about Bitcoin. But to have somebody, a former president, that was actually willing to listen to a group of people to understand it better. So for me, that was a major takeaway, and to understand why it mattered, why it would activate a group of voters to actually care enough to, take action to vote in favor of somebody that's behind it.
And I do wonder, what was he most curious about? Like, what was he most interested in? What did he think that he could get out of this equation by being supportive to the mining contingent? And Fred, you're welcome to chime in, too. I know your CFO was there. You've been briefed. But I'd love to hear from all of you.
What I think what was an important part of the meeting that came out is President Trump understood the growing energy demands. He'd actually just come from that publicized meeting in San Francisco and Silicon Valley with a bunch of tech leaders, and he came in there saying like, wow, I'm really understanding there's a lot of energy demand that's coming from various sectors going forward. We need more energy independence, and that's always been a part of his platform to meet the demands of these applications. And I think one of the things that he was very interested in, and we saw that from this Truth Social post that he made after the meeting, was how Bitcoin mining is the tool to bring more generation. And what is going to happen, I believe, is generators and nation states are going to understand if they want energy independence, if they want to bring more generation to meet these new demands, Bitcoin mining is the ideal tool to do it. And why not make the United States the leader in that movement?
And let's talk about that for a minute. And I'll push to you, Fred, on this one. Now, the three of you are not doing what we're seeing with other miners in the industry, i.e. this transition into also serving AI clients. So we've seen Core Scientific do that, among others. But there are natural synergies there because, as you said, everybody wants power. There's not enough infrastructure. There's not enough energy as it stands now. So walk me through how it's a complementary business. And also, I'd love to hear how Trump responded to the strategy that you presented to him on that front.
Sure. So if you think about AI, there are two types. You have learning models and you have inference. Learning models is a constant load. You're constantly churning data and you're ingesting data that's been collected from a variety of places. Inference is more like search. And so the frequency of queries varies. And these systems are they're very energy intensive. As a matter of fact, the power density of the NVIDIA product roadmap is quadrupling over 2 years, meaning the same box is going to need 4 times more power in 2 years than it uses today. And so the problem for the utilities that provide power to AI is they don't like load that looks like this. They want load that looks like this because they have to balance it. And so the marriage of AI and Bitcoin mining is perfect because Bitcoin mining is a curtailable load. The power industry looks at Bitcoin mining as a battery because we can shed load. And so when you marry Bitcoin mining and AI, you get this perfect synergy. And it's a question of how do you do that? And so as a company, Marathon's very focused on identifying the technologies and providing the solutions that allow you to marry AI and inference. The other thing that a lot of people get mixed up on regarding AI is they think it's all going to be in these big hyperscaler clouds, and that's wrong. The vast majority of AI load will be in private clouds at the edge of the network because it'll be machine-to-machine traffic. It won't be human. It won't be you and I asking for directions or things like that. It's going to be a drill head wondering exactly how fast to turn, how deep to go, because its AI model is controlling its rigs. So that'll be at the edge. One of the key things we think that relative to the political issues here is also made in USA technology becomes very important.
Well, I mean, and Jason, you mentioned the fact that Trump took to, he posted his thoughts within 4 hours of this meeting. One of the things that he said was all future Bitcoin will be made in America. Now that's, I mean, Fred, you have so many different mines out like on the continent of Africa, all over the place, the Middle East. So we know that that's not a thing, and actually one of the greatest benefits of Bitcoin is how highly decentralized it is and having that network spread around the world. So you just brought up that made in America. Break down that comment that he made and what you mean.
Sure. So the Bitcoin is a way to project power. The US is the single largest holder of gold in the world. They can project power by their gold holdings. If the US were to have a strategic reserve of Bitcoin, they could project power. There are nations today who are commodity producers who purposefully are avoiding using the US dollar as a currency for transactions and for holding their assets in it because they don't want to help support the US deficit spending and they don't want to support the US debt. And so they're buying gold. Countries like China are some of the largest buyers of gold. And so Russia, China, India, these countries are looking, Saudi Arabia as well, how can we use an asset like Bitcoin to hold our reserves, because a lot of these countries don't want to hold each other's currencies. And so if countries use Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset, you run into the risk that if the US doesn't have the most Bitcoin, they can't project power, and they become powerless. And so Donald Trump's perspective, as voiced at this event, was all Bitcoin mining should be in the US so the US can control the transacting of Bitcoin. Because what Bitcoin miners do, yes, we generate Bitcoin through the subsidies that we get when we mine, but we're actually processing transactions. And if all transaction processing is happening outside the US, then maybe the other countries could block the US Bitcoin holdings from transacting. And so if the US has most mining in the US, they have an ability to control a certain volume of Bitcoin transactions. So this is where power politics, and I don't mean energy, I mean Bitcoin power, comes to play, and why the US needs to be the largest holder of Bitcoin and the largest miner of Bitcoin.
So you're getting into this idea of Bitcoin on the U.S. balance sheet. Obviously, there's been a rumor floating around all week about this with respect to what Senator Lummis might announce, what Trump might announce tomorrow. Have any of you been advising his team? Have they reached out to you for either the senator's team or the
I don't think anyone should comment if they have.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that, kind of, Zach, I'd like to go to you out of this whole, made in America concept and some of what Fred was just getting into. Respond. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's important. We actually put ourselves out there as America's Bitcoin miner. And, we do focus. We focused our efforts on being the largest miner in the U.S. from an operating hash rate point of view, and we're continuing to grow.
Yeah, you just doubled your hash rate in the last 6 months.
Yeah, in the last 6 months, and we're on a trajectory to, quickly do it again. And we are concentrating a lot of our hash rate in the U.S. because we do think it matters. We think it's important. But it's also important that it's decentralized. So that's why we have spread ourselves across multiple states. And at some point, we probably will also go be international, but we'll be a large U.S. company representing ourselves internationally. And so that's how we see it. The Bitcoin is still flowing, back here. It's not just because we think the Bitcoin should be here, but we think that you go back, 4 years, and everyone was worried a little bit about Bitcoin being centralized in China. If we're talking about hash rate being centralized, I'd like to see it in, a free country like ours.
I'd also add, MacKenzie, to President Trump's statement on that. I think it's about setting a big goal in order to result in being the leader, right? It's impossible for the United States to mine all the Bitcoin. But if we set a goal that we want to do that, that's how you end up to be a leadership position. So I think the game theory of Bitcoin works out where we don't have to worry about a country, one entity having an inordinate amount of mining power. But if the United States' goal is, hey, we want to try to mine all of the Bitcoin that we can here in the United States, then we're going to be a leader in this space.
I think the other thing he was also very focused on was technology. The predominant technology providers to the Bitcoin mining industry have been Chinese for many years. And Auradine, a company we helped co-found that now is producing miners, they're showing their equipment here. President Trump was very impressed with the fact that Auradine was a US company making miners, and was very excited about the fact that a US company was doing this. And it's of strategic importance to the US that we control our technology, especially in the field of Bitcoin mining. But when you look at Bitcoin mining's evolution over the next 10 years, it will become highly decentralized because devices will start mining Bitcoin versus large industrial companies. In 10 years, these three companies will be doing totally different things.
Yeah, and I think that to Jack Dorsey's credit at Block, they're very interested in making that kind of individual mining system possible and affordable. Let's think about a post-November scenario. How do you feel about business conditions under a President Harris versus a President Trump?
Well, Harris hasn't given a platform yet, so I'm not going to comment on what she has said. Her political perspectives have historically been more to the progressive side of President Biden's perspective. And we know that Senator Warren is still actively trying to activate her crypto army, her war on crypto. And she just recently, in a hearing in Washington, ranted and raved about the CFIUS thing in Wyoming and all of this stuff. So what we are seeing, though, is a shift in the Democratic Party's openness. And look at the legislative level. So forget about the White House for a second. At the legislative level, there was a bipartisan agreement to repeal SAB 121. There is bipartisan agreement that the U.S. needs good crypto regulation.
And how many Democrats crossed the aisle for FIT 21?
Including
70 plus?
Including, the head of the Senate, right? And so I think it's very important for the U.S. to move in this direction. I think the Democrats see it. There are obviously a number of Democratic politicians and their operatives here at the conference soliciting input from people trying to figure things out. However, I think that Republicans have kind of seized the day on this, and I think under a Trump administration, you're going to see Bitcoin mining flourish. Under a Harris administration, we have no idea what the energy policy is going to be. And the attack vectors for crypto are going to be energy policy and banking, as they always have been. Project Choke Point 2.0, and then find a way to tax Bitcoin miners. The EIA is still trying to do their survey of energy of Bitcoin miners, trying to find the data to try and attack us.
I think Fred is exactly right. And while we haven't seen Vice President Kamala make any public statements for her campaign around Bitcoin, I think that's to be determined. She is a part of this Biden administration. And the Biden administration has launched a whole of government attack against this sector. And that gives me a lot of apprehension. President Trump, on the other hand, has been very positive to this industry, like we're talking about. So I think that it is pretty important for the success of Bitcoin, at least in the short term, to have the right pro-Bitcoin politicians in office. No matter what side of the aisle, I think it's important for voters to follow those candidates. So what things look like in November, I think, will depend on which pro-Bitcoin candidates are elected.
Zach, real quick.
Yeah, I think something important to recognize is when we met, we didn't ask for anything except not to be attacked. Yeah. Because that's really what we need to flourish. We don't need that much. Bitcoin's going to take care of itself. Its value is built in. We all know this. This is why we're here. We just need to not be attacked by politicians and put in a box. It's just going to weaken the U.S.'s position. It'll weaken, everything that goes on inside the space. So just a lack of attack, which is why I think right now, to use Fred's words, they've seized the day. They've really moved, and it's a good opportunity. And I hope we do see bipartisan support very soon because it's the right thing to do.
Last question on Trump, and then I will move us beyond that conversation. what are the safeguards in place to make sure he delivers on promises? Because even that meeting, there was a price tag to be in the room in Mar-a-Lago. That's my understanding. Like a very kind promise was made that $100 million would be raised to re-elect Trump, that 5 million votes would be delivered, and so Trump certainly gets something out of this. But like, what happens when if he's elected in November?
I think Zach made the right point there. We don't need anything. We just don't need an active campaign to fight against us.
Yep.
And that's why it's such a great issue.
Yeah.
You get all of these voters behind you, and you don't need to do anything except just don't be hostile. And I think we can count on that.
Yeah. But what we do need is we need everybody in this room to show up and actually stand behind the issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And more importantly, not just at the presidential level, but all the way down the ballot.
Yeah.
We have to get the right people in Congress and keep the right people in Congress. Because at the end of the day, it's the legislative branch that decides.
So I feel like, April, a lot of media, a lot of press around the halving and how it could potentially decimate the industry, and certainly we have seen some players washed out. We've seen M&A. I've got Jason and Zach. I'd love to hear about how you're feeling about the deal making going on at your companies right now. But we saw a collective market cap hit an all-time high for Bitcoin miners post-halving. So talk to me about the dynamics here and what's going on.
So two things are happening. One is, obviously, we're all growing. Zach just talked about it. A miner who deployed miners 3 years ago using machines that run at 30 joules a terahash, 30 watts a terahash, when you unplug those and you plug in a miner that runs at 15 joules per terahash, you just doubled your hash rate without incrementing your amount of power. Our industry runs on 3 C's: capital, compute, and capacity. Capacity is the long pole in the tent. That's basically having power and having some place to plug miners in. The upgrade cycle is allowing miners with capital to grow. And most of our market caps are driven based on our growth rates. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about our growth rates. Right? If we were talking about net asset value, it'd be a totally different story. So growth rate is what drives market capitalization. The non-public miners don't have the ability to drive that story. And it's been very hard since 2022 for non-public miners to raise capital. So what you're seeing is, on a global hash rate perspective, the public miners' share of overall global hash rate has grown from 21% to 28% in the past 3 months, where it had been declining before because more mining was coming online offshore. There were more private miners. But post-halving, a lot of those offshore miners don't have the capital to do the upgrade cycle. And so you're seeing them fall off.
And then Zach and Jason, we were talking backstage just a minute ago about the fact that part of why deal making is happening now is that it has to happen now before companies become too expensive to buy. So walk me through what some of the thought process was on the deals that you're making.
Yeah, so we've been very focused, during the bear cycles when we had our largest growth, and then we, in January we made a very large purchase order to lock in pricing for the machines. And we ended up long machines, and we did it on purpose because we felt we knew that there would be miners that fell to the wayside or private miners that would choose not to do the upgrade cycle, which has been a lot of our acquisitions at the site levels. And you want to have the miners, and you want to have those miners when the prices are cheap, when the asset values are low, to take advantage. I really think that we're quickly approaching the next push into a bull cycle. And the last bull cycle, there was a lot of acquisitions and movement during that cycle. But I think really the miners that have reached scale, we're going to slow down a little bit in the bull cycle, and we're just going to ride the growth of the Bitcoin that we're producing. And the right thing to do is wait for the bear cycle to kind of roll back around. So I think we only have just a very few months left to really try and get the asset values in the right place at the right time before we push up and things start to be meaningfully more expensive.
I disagree, and here's why. We did most of our acquisitions at the beginning of this year. The average price we paid was $450,000 a megawatt, which is less than the cost to build those sites. Today, the average price on the deals that are being done are over $1 million. They're soon going to be at closer to $2 million. And the reason is people are stressing to grow. And what's going to continue to happen is between the battle for power, it's not just Bitcoin miners that are buying Bitcoin miners, it's AI companies that also are looking at buying Bitcoin miners. And this is the problem. There is a totally different group of people today coming in and wanting to access power. And a Bitcoin miner that has tied up 400 or 500 megawatts in a location with a good internet connection is all of a sudden a cherry picker for an AI company. And they are willing to pay a lot more for the power. And so the power companies are now essentially saying, well, I can sell stranded energy to a Bitcoin miner, or I can sell energy to an AI company for twice the price. What am I going to do? And so I think you're only going to see this accelerate, actually, this acquisition. It's going to run.
Jason, deal making.
Yeah, I think we're on the verge of something huge here with Bitcoin. I think we have the most successful ETF launch in history. Massively successful products are out here. We're on the verge of a total shift in public policy attitude around Bitcoin in Washington, D.C., hopefully coming this November. If you think you're bullish, you're not bullish enough. And for that reason, I think all miners are continuing to try to get more capacity, continuing to get growth in. Here at Riot, we have a massive organic pipeline. We have a 1 gigawatt site that we are building out in Texas. In addition to that, we are very active in M&A. On Tuesday of this week, we announced the acquisition of a company called Block Mining with several sites in Kentucky, and now we're going to be expanding in a new region there as well. We want this foothold. All miners are looking to grab this foothold as this industry is on the verge of taking off, I think, in a big way.
Yeah, the competition for power, because, Fred, you were just saying this a minute ago, too. The fact that you now have AI and HPC in the mix, it's just there's not enough power out there. And you've got people like Sam Altman joining a long line of tech giants saying that nuclear is the only way that we meet all of these, rapidly expanding energy demands. Is that?
But the big problem is, and we speak about this all the time, the biggest challenge in the US and globally actually is lack of transmission capacity. You can have a nuclear power plant generating 5 gigawatts of power. You can't get the power to the homes.
Yeah.
Amazon did a deal with Talon Energy where they bought at very low cost energy directly adjacent to a nuclear power plant. And now the power regulators are saying, we think the pricing here needs to be adjusted, because when you put a large load behind the meter, you're not paying any transmission fees. And when you don't pay transmission fees, there's nobody paying to fund the transmission that's needed to put in place the infrastructure. So either this country has to do power generation at the edge, which means lots of solar, lots of batteries, lots of residential community microgrid systems, which cost a lot of money to build, or you build a lot of transmission. And so what you're going to see now also is the tariff system is going to change for power. We are $3.5 to $4 trillion behind on transmission in the U.S. And that's why we're long international when it comes to power. We think there is so much more power available outside the U.S. at prices that are lower, because in the U.S., this is going to be a dogfight.
Yeah, Zach, CleanSpark, all about renewable energy. Talk to me about your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, but what Fred's right about is that, building a lot of microgrids can be expensive, but it doesn't mean that we should not build it. We need to build more generation in this country. We've always been fans. If you look at where we go, we're different than how Texas works, where there's needed demand response because of potential scarcity. We go to abundant locations where there's plenty of power, and what you commonly find in those abundant locations is nuclear power. Georgia, for example, is one of the few places that's actually put a nuclear reactor online in the last 30 years. We need a lot more of that in the U.S. Small modular reactors are a great opportunity to work in that space, and miners are the perfect fit for those. We can show up and we can take the power and we can make that feasible from a profitability point of view on day one, and then we can work to build the transmission lines, because that's always the gap. You build generation, and if transmission lags, you have an asset and somebody that has invested capital that they're not getting a return on. Having miners in a situation where we can park next to it and even shift from place to place to place as projects move on, that is the answer for how we build more generation in this country. Because I agree, it is going to be a dogfight, but it's a dogfight we shouldn't give up on.
I'd also add, I think nuclear is the ideal long-term energy solution.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, these projects take a long time to get there with the red tape, with whatever. I don't know. It takes a very long time to get those done right now. Yep. But the energy demands are now. We can't say we're going to get there in 5-10 years. We operate primarily in Texas. That Texas grid has more wind and solar than I think any other state in the union. But that results in a lot of variability in generation. It doesn't always meet demand. Something that Texas is focused on, which I think the entire country needs to focus on, is more baseload generation. That means more combined cycle gas plants. That is how we meet the energy demands in all hours of the day, and I think loads like Bitcoin mining are the perfect tool to bring those projects forward.
Last question, did you have?
Yeah, just the other thing is the challenge with SMRs and the new nuclear that's coming online is the LCOE, the levelized cost of energy, is too expensive for Bitcoin miners. It's 4, 5, 6 cents kilowatt hour. You need these larger plants that take much longer to build to get the cost of energy down. And you have to look at that energy cost over a long period of time. So I think that's our challenge. Right?
So last question, we only have a minute here, but I want to hear from each of you on it. We've seen some Bitcoin miners, especially those that are diversifying into serving these AI clients, sell their Bitcoin reserves, what they're mining for the company, in order to buy the equipment that they need in order to diversify into that business. All three of you are hodling your Bitcoin. Talk to me about that.
Well, come on, we're talking about Bitcoin as a strategic asset. The U.S. projects power with Bitcoin. Anybody who doesn't believe we're at the inflection point of a boom in the price of Bitcoin shouldn't be in this room or in this business. And if you think about that...
Okay.
Why would you sell your Bitcoin?
Zach, you next.
So there's a time and a place, right? So if we're going to sell Bitcoin, it's going to be to find a way to get more Bitcoin. And right now, the better way to do is to use fiat currency to get Bitcoin rather than the other way around.
Jason.
We're a Bitcoin company. We value having a strong balance sheet. There's no stronger way to have a balance sheet than by holding Bitcoin.
Thank you so much to the panelists, to everyone who joined us this morning, and of course to the Bitcoin 2024 team. Thanks, guys.
The Bitcoin Conference. We started with a dream to build a community focused on Bitcoin. It all started in 2019 in the heart of San Francisco, the first major Bitcoin conference in years that kickstarted a revolution. And then Miami, a place where enthusiasts, developers, dreamers, and innovators could come together to make Bitcoin better. It has been an amazing 5 years and 8 conferences, thanks to all of you. Bitcoin Conference has become the largest premier global Bitcoin gathering in the world, leading hyper-Bitcoinization. While Miami was incredible, it was time to set the stage for Bitcoin in a new city. So we took the conference on the road. Nashville, Tennessee was the obvious choice, a city known for music and freedom. Next year, the conference is hitting the road again in search of the next global stage. We are headed to a new city next year. With hyper-Bitcoinization right around the corner, we have no plans to take the foot off the gas. Find out where we are headed next. Scan the QR code and be at the main stage for the big announcement.